From watching Pete Alonso compete in his 5th home run derby, we are learning that narratives change quickly when you're in a contract year in New York City.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at JustBaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.the, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. Now, this show is going to be a little bit different for me. I don't have any notes that I'm working off of. Nothing. This is all off the cuff, as I just want to have an open dialogue about Pete Alonso and his contract year and just the way narratives can change so swiftly for a player. And when it comes to Pete Alonso, I have covered every single pitch of his big league career on this show. I started the podcast 2019 was my first year with Locked On. So that was Alonso's rookie season. Every single step of the journey, I've had a show. And as I was preparing tonight, and again, I don't got notes. This is just in my head, sort of mentally preparing on what do I want to talk about here. I was brought back to the first home run derby that Pete Alonso competed in when he was a rookie. It was the first time seeing him do it. And it's never going to be better than the original, although the sequel for Alonso is pretty good, winning back-to-back years. But that first year, you had his cousin throwing to him, and he wasn't getting great BP, but Pete Alonso was finding a way to hit anything out of the ballpark to stay alive in that tournament and to win it. And this year, you're watching Pete Alonso year 5 of doing it, and he's taking pitches where there's 40 pitches that he gets, and you have Dave Joust, who's throwing to him again, trying to recreate that magic from 2021 when he won the second time, and Joust was amazing for him. And Joust was giving him terrible BP. Alonso's taking pitches. There wasn't a sense of urgency. And he hits 12 home runs, and it's all right, bye, Pete. And you have Alec Boehm after he's done or after he's been eliminated, Alonso has, saying, oh, that's just how everyone had it, because everyone before the Derby was talking about why Alec Boehm was even there, and Boehm advanced. He had the best amount or had the most home runs through the first 5 hitters and was the first guy to advance to the next round. And so that alone's frustrating, right? Seeing a Philly sort of laugh at Alonso, and everything about Pete Alonso and Arlington this year has just been off. And I did a show after he was selected to be an all-star where I railed against him. And after the home run derby, the first thing I tweeted out was, I'm so glad that we missed out on Francisco Lindor or Brandon Nimmo being in Arlington for Pete Alonso to compete in that derby, because that is exactly why he was the Mets all-star, because they wanted him for the derby. Congratulations, Major League Baseball. That's what you got. But now I look at what's happening and everything going on, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm thinking, am I being too hard on Pete? Pete Alonso, when it comes to this derby, it's been the same recipe for years now. First year, of course, he's a rookie, gets invited. He's obviously going to do it. I think he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was either leading baseball or leading the National League in home runs going into the derby, and he wins that. It's amazing. Second time he's not an all-star in 2021. It's his only season where he hasn't been an all-star, because 2020 there was no all-star game. And he had a derby crown to defend. So he came in just for the derby and he won it. 2022, 2023, and now 2024, he has said the same thing each year. I'm not going to participate in the derby unless I'm an all-star. And that's been, I don't know if it's always been his ticket to be an all-star, because he's put up all-star worthy seasons, but it's been a wise thing to do for your career. He's going to enter free agency as a 4-time all-star, and the home run derby has helped him with that. It's helped his notoriety as a star player. It's helped him get advertisements. He has done the right thing for his career with the way that he has navigated the derby, because the derby put his name on the map, and there's nothing wrong with that. And he talks about how he wanted to compete in the home run derby when he was a kid. So imagine Pete Alonso, who is hitting home runs in travel baseball. For those of you who played, there was that first year where guys start leaving the yard. And at least from my experience playing travel, where you're playing on the 200-foot field still, and you start to sort of, outgrow it, and you're hitting the home runs. I never was that guy. I was the guy that was occasionally giving up those home runs. But You imagine Alonso back then dreaming of being in the big leagues and being able to compete in the Derby, and then he has done that. He has achieved everything you want to do along the way, and he's been celebrated handsomely, with adoration from fans all the way across it. And now 2024, everything has flipped on him. What's Pete Alonso's Q rating right now? Do fans like Pete Alonso? I'm sure there's still a large segment of the fan base that does, but it's different. The contract year has made it different. Pete Alonso all of a sudden is not as likable as Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, because those guys are playing better. And those guys deserve to be in Arlington playing in that game. And I can't get away from that take because it's a fact. And maybe Pete Alonso, when he's in that Derby or when he's playing in the All-Star game, maybe he'll have some imposter syndrome. Because maybe there is that part deep down his brain where he knows he shouldn't be there, but he didn't do anything wrong. And so this whole thing has happened, and this guy just keeps wearing the bullets for this team. And in some ways, I think that's freed up Brandon Nimmo and Francisco Lindor. Because Alonso is this like meat shield out in front of everybody who's getting all the attention. Because his name was floated at the deadline last year, and that has been a story ever since. And he has had to play with that, weighing him down since. And it's clearly impacting him. I'm not saying that's why he didn't have a good Derby performance. If Dave Joust throws good BP, Pete Alonso might have won tonight. I don't know. But it's about everything that's going on with Pete Alonso. He changes to have Scott Boras represent him. Now he's less likable, right? Scott Boras, the most hated agent in sports. Fans are going to like him a little bit less because he did that. But from Alonso's perspective, he had Max Scherzer as his teammate for a year and a half, who I'm sure said plenty of good things about Scott Boras. Brandon Nimmo, the likable Met, is represented by Scott Boras. So Alonso, maybe frustrated with his old representation, decides I need to make sure that I set up my family for generations. I need to take advantage of this free agent year, and I need the best in the business to do it. But he's begrudged for it. And so to me, I'm at a crossroads where I'm so torn. I'm so torn on Pete Alonso because here's a guy that has across the way done everything right. Everything right. Going through the minor leagues, making up to the big leagues, making a name for himself, rookie home run record, all-star, constantly a 40 home run, 100 RBI bat in the middle of your lineup, year in, year out, durable, plays every day. I mean, broke his wrist or whatever that was last year. I think it was a wrist, right? It breaks his wrist, gets back off a broken wrist or whatever it was in 10 days, gets in a car accident in spring training, comes out without a scratch. Like everything that Pete Alonso has done, he has just put the Mets first, put his career first. He has just plodded along. He donates to charity when he wins the home run derby. Every home run he hits this year is donated to charity. He's great in the community. Like everything he's done right to be a Met forever and to be celebrated and always adored. And now he could be gone in 2 weeks, really, but I don't think that's happening. This could be the last couple months of Pete Alonso's a New York Met. To me, that should not be something that fans are welcoming. And I'm seeing that narrative shift. And I can't lie, there's still part of me that wonders, as a long advocate of pay the man, is he worth it? Is it worth it to commit whatever dollar amount it is to sign Pete Alonso? I want to talk about that next. Is this an end of an era for Pete Alonso with the New York Mets? So we're going to get to that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. Because all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you versus the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. You can get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today, and you can also now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week, from lowering players' stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. This has not been an ideal contract year for Pete Alonso. If things had broke the way he was scripting them in his dreams heading into the season, he'd have 25 home runs right now. Maybe he'd driven in about 60. He'd be a clear-cut all-star. He would have won the home run derby, tying him with Ken Griffey Jr. for the only players ever to have 3 home run derby crowns. And he still wants to chase after that. So don't expect this to be the last derby that Alonso's in. He's going to be doing this till the wheels come off, it feels like, whether that's in a Mets uniform or not. But all these boxes would have been checked, and the Mets would have made the playoffs and gone on a deep run, which can still happen. But Pete Alonso would be a commodity hitting free agency. And now you look at what he's done, and he's not trending in the right direction. He's going to hit free agency off 2 relative down years here. And now you look at the numbers for Pete Alonso right now. I'm going to pull them up because he's not having a horrible season. It feels like it at times because he's gone through these prolonged, droughts of power and slumps, but he still has a 119 WRC plus, 100 is league average, so he's 19% better than your league average hitter. He's got 19 home runs. He's driven in 51. There's still every chance that he could get to the benchmark of 100 RBIs, although it's going to have to take a pretty torrid stretch to close out this season to do that. Maybe he still can get to 40 home runs. And if he does, if he reaches those plateaus, which we've seen him get to pretty much every season of his career, rookie year, 53 homers, 120 RBIs, 2021, 37 home runs, 94 RBIs, came up just short in both of those categories. And he was great after winning that derby. The second half that year, Pete Alonso went off. So he still has that in him. You look at 2022, 40, 131 driven in. Last year, 46, 118 driven in. But he hit 217 last year. The first part of his career, he was a 260 hitter who got on base at a 350 clip. Now it's more a 320 on base guy and a 220 to 240 hitter. And the slug has dipped this year below 500 for the first time in his career outside of the 2020 season, which was 57 games. You really can't count it. The numbers aren't adding up for Pete Alonso, and he's entering his age 30 season. And if you are a GM of whatever team, the Cubs, the Brewers, the Brewers aren't going to pay Pete for you to see, the Cubs, the Giants, whatever team it is, and you're watching him in the home run derby, there has to be at least some thought in your mind of that's not the same guy from 19 and 21 that had the best power in the game that we saw on display. Is it ridiculous to judge him when you saw the pitching of Dave Joust and just a derby in general, meaning anything? Of course, but that doesn't stop narratives from forming and building. So you look at Pete Alonso and what he's heading towards in free agency. I have no idea. And in some ways, that might help him stay with the Mets, to be completely honest. I mean, he might come back on a team-friendly deal at this point, and it could be the best thing for the Mets. Every time he gets an opportunity, he talks about how much he loves New York. I honestly believe if the contracts are the same, he's going to sign with the Mets, but he's also going to take the best offer because that's what you're supposed to do. When you have a chance to make generational wealth for your family, you go for it and you capitalize on what you've brought to the game. And Pete Alonso has earned every penny of whatever he's going to make because he has been one of the most marketable stars in the game. But what's that free agent, what's the resume looking like? In 2021, if you look at the splits of Pete Alonso's season. So first half, Alonso, not great, but he was able to defend his Derby crown. They gave him that honor. So he went, at the time when he went into the All-Star break, he was hitting 249, 326 on base, 477 slugging percentage, 116 WRC plus. Very similar to the numbers we've seen right now. Second half, he hit 275, got on base at a 361 clip, slugged at a 560 clip, had a 145 WRC plus. His OPS jumped 120 points from the first half to the second half. And when it comes to the home runs, first half that year, he had 17 in 78 games. Second half that year, he had 20 home runs in 74 games. His RBI is 49 in the first half, 45 in the second half. So not a drastic jump there, but he was definitely better. Now we're going to see what he does in the second half. We're going to see the numbers that he puts up. And there is still a chance that Pete Alonso can completely flip the script on this season. He can. He can go out. He could have a monster last couple months. He can help carry the Mets for stretches. And maybe in October, he has some great moments. But it really does blow me away how the fan base can turn on a guy. And I'm not taking shots because was I happy that Pete Alonso was an all-star? No. Have I been railing about it for the past week and a half or whatever it's been? Absolutely. Do I like seeing Pete Alonso there at the Derby and at the All-Star game when I wanted to see Mark Vientos get his first shot at a Derby and I wanted to see Francisco Lindor appear in an All-Star game as a Met for the first time, or Brandon Nimmo getting a much-deserved first ever All-Star appearance in his career? Like, I'm not going to apologize for the takes that I've had and how I feel watching Pete Alonso right now, and it's a frustrating experience for a guy that I have really appreciated over the past 6 years, or 6 seasons, I should say. I want to see Pete Alonso retire, man. I want to see Pete Alonso hit 500 home runs as a New York Met. But you really get to this point where you have to wonder, is that the best thing for the franchise? And it's crazy how much those things can change. Because a year ago, at the Home Run Derby in 2023, it was just, hey, get him next time, Pete. And there was no thought of any of this. We had an inkling the Mets might be sellers, but the franchise went through a drastic shift in identity from the All-Star break last year to the deadline when they sold. And then everything has been in flux ever since then. And you have a team that is building in the right direction. And I talked about that on yesterday's show, how much I love this front office. But that front office is going to have a really tough decision to make on Pete Alonso. And so to close out the show today, I just want to give you my sort of mental check-in on July 16th about 4 months from when decisions are going to start to be made there on Pete, on what I want to see happen and how it could all shake out. So we're going to close the show there in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city. This weekend, the Mets will be playing in Miami against the Marlins. I'm going to be in attendance on Friday night. So if you decide to book with Booking.com, come to that series, hit me up on social media, and I will try to meet you at the game. It should be a lot of fun. And remember, the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals, even Miami. So book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. There's the draft going on right now, and there's going to be a part 2 of the episode today where I'm going to break down everything from day 2 of the draft. There was, 8 picks made, so I'm going to go through all of that in another episode. But the Locked On Mets insiders, they already know my feelings on those draft picks because I sent them a pick-by-pick analysis through Subtext. So they got a text on each pick today where they were able to learn about who these guys are and how they'll factor into the Mets system. So if you want to be part of that type of bonus coverage on the New York Mets, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider by finding the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's tie a bow here on this and really look ahead to what happens here with Pete Alonso. First things first, I hope that Pete Alonso will get to the other side of this deadline and be a new man, because I think it has weighed on him. They asked him the question today in his media availability where they asked him if someone has come up to him yet and sort of said, all right, Pete, you're off the hook. We're not going to trade you. We're going for it this year. No one's done that yet. And he didn't really kind of talked around the question because what's he going to say? But it's one of those situations where you can't really blame the front office for how they've handled this because they've been open and honest from day one. David Stearns has said, Pete Alonso is represented by a guy that likes to bring his clients into free agency. We expect that to happen. We'll pursue all those conversations in free agency. We are very excited about Pete Alonso being our starting first baseman this year. He said all the right things, but one of the cards that David Stearns never wanted to take off the table is the fact that there was a world, and there still could be one, where Pete Alonso gets traded. If the Mets fall on their face out of the break and they drop to 5 games out, Pete Alonso could get traded. Brett Baty could be up playing third base, and Mark Vientos could be at first. That could happen. It's not out of the cards yet. The Mets have to finish this thing strong to still be a buyer. I think they will. I believe in this team, but it is still technically in the cards. Now, assuming that you get beyond that, assuming that Pete Alonso on August 1st is a New York Met and the Mets are still in this race, maybe there is a load of pressure off that he can just play the string out and not worry as much about where he's going to play, because he knows he's with the Mets for the rest of the season. He knows he's with his guys. At the same time, there's still the contract that he's playing for. So the pressure doesn't leave, but maybe getting back into the race, that's going to heat Pete Alonso's bat up. And I still think that if you're telling me, who's the one bat in the Mets lineup that could carry the Mets through a round in the playoffs, could carry the Mets throughout a push in September, who can hit a home run in 5 straight games, it's Pete Alonso. He still has the most power on this team. And when he's right, I don't think there's a better home run hitter in baseball outside of Aaron Judge and maybe Shohei Ohtani, but this guy has been that throughout his career. He still leads Major League Baseball in home runs since 2019, partially because Judge hasn't always been healthy, but durability factors in. So I don't want to see this go really sideways for Pete. But if we get a continuation of what we've seen so far, which is, I don't know, B- Pete Alonso, where he's still hitting his home runs and maybe he finishes with, 30. I think it's pretty easy to envision him doing that. For his last 30 days, I think he has 5 home runs. So sort of think about that throughout the rest of the season. Can he get 11 more to get to 30? I think so. Maybe he finishes with 30 and 75, 30 home runs, 75 RBIs. And he's got the 120 WRC plus, and he's a 2-win player. And he's a good first baseman, but he doesn't have a great year. When he hits that market, is there a team that's offering him $200 million? Even if he has a torrid stretch down over the final couple months, is he getting $200 million? I think he'd have to have an unbelievable finish of the season where he hits 11 home runs in August, 10 in September, finds his way to 40 home runs, drives in 100, is the NLCS MVP, and the Mets go. I think everything would have to break right from this point on for this guy to get $200 million. I just do not see it. The one caveat is the contract we have talked about on this show a couple times now, where it would be Pete Alonso getting $200 million from the Mets, but with significant deferrals that take the value of that contract to something closer to the 7 years, $158 million that he was offered from the Mets last year around the trade deadline, and he turned it down. Getting to that value, I think, could make a lot of sense. And the deferrals with this guy who has been the franchise player, homegrown star, he's the type that would take that type of a deferral structure to get the big flashy number, but to stay with the organization. So I still think that contract is there for him, but the Mets have to, well, actually, let me change that. I hope that contract is still there for him, and I hope he would take it. And I think that might be his best route to getting paid. Otherwise, I think it's some team that gives him like a 3-year, $90 million deal, something that's high A, these short years, opt out, a Scott Boras special, if you were, okay? Where Pete Alonso next year is teaming up with Cody Bellinger in Chicago and he's getting paid $35 million, but it's to hit the market again the following season. And that's not how I want to see Pete Alonso finishing out his career. I don't want to see Pete Alonso jumping around to different teams. I want to see Pete Alonso with one team, that team being the Mets. But then again, I can also see the other side of it. I totally understand the fans who think that Brett Baty should be the starting third baseman of the future and Mark Vientos should slide over to first. Or if you're not even that much in the Baty camp, still just thinking Vientos should play first, and you figure out something else at third, giving Baty and Mauricio an opportunity next year, letting your prospects come through the system, seeing exactly who's going to stick at that spot, but just moving on. I get that opinion, because does it make sense to pay a guy that probably should be a DH for most of his 30s into his, however long he's playing, but for his next contract, I'd imagine most of that should be as a DH. And honestly, I think Pete Alonso will be better as a DH. If the Mets were to bring him back, and it's the deal I laid out, or maybe he makes less because he has a bad year, whatever it is, he comes back, he gets Brandon Nimmo type money, and he's in a Mets uniform for 6 or 7 years, whatever it is. If the Mets made the decision next year, we're going to start Beatty at third. We're going to have Vientos and Alonso sort of switch off at first base. But ultimately, Vientos is going to end up playing more because he's younger, and Alonso is going to get comfortable in that DH role. I think you could see a renaissance of Pete Alonso locked up in a Mets uniform. He's minted. He is going to finish his career with the Mets. I could see Pete Alonso turning in 5 more really strong seasons after this year where all he focuses on is hitting. Where in between innings, instead of having to play first base, he's down in the clubhouse or in that, in the batting cage where they have that new, I don't know if you've seen it, there's this new insane pitching machine where it literally throws the guy's pitch. Like, you can set up the axes of the different offerings that the pitcher has. You can even watch his motion come at you from this crazy high-tech, looking, it's like a video game that's come to life. And you can prepare for your at-bats. So if Pete Alonso had that tool and he didn't have to worry about first base anymore, and he could just focus on watching the spin of that slider for 10 minutes before he steps in the box, and then he could finally spit on it instead of chasing at it. I mean, this guy could be unbelievable still. I still hope that Pete Alonso is going to come back to the Mets, and I still think that as a franchise, even with Mark Vientos and his ascent, if you can get a guy who can put up 40 and 100 for you, you keep him. But I guess I'm talking in circles throughout this entire show today, and I apologize on that. I'm in a turmoil as a Mets fan. I think a lot of you are probably experiencing with Pete Alonso, where I don't know what the outcome is. And it's feeling a lot to me like Jacob deGrom's last year with the Mets a couple years ago, where the contract wasn't settled. You knew that free agency was coming. And I kept trying to convince myself, because there's that little boy in me probably that, it gets upset when a homegrown Met leaves, or just a Met that I like leaves, that wants to see them in blue and orange forever, that could not admit to myself when the writing is on the wall for something. And that was the case with Jacob deGrom. And maybe that's the case for Pete Alonso. Maybe this is it. This is the last hurrah. And hopefully the Mets can make it a joyous one if that's the case. And they could go on a little bit of a run this year. We can see Pete Alonso in more than just a 3-game wild card round. Maybe we could see the Mets make a run and see Pete Alonso on the biggest stage for potentially the final time. But there's really no telling which way this thing's going to go. So now it's 2 weeks to the deadline. That's the first benchmark. You get past that, see how the season goes, and then it'll be a very interesting winter for Pete Alonso, for the polar bear, which is his time, right? Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I do have a second show coming on the draft. So if you're listening on the audio side, that's just going to hit your audio feed. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you find that. To make sure you don't miss it, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Goal is to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I appreciate all of you for helping me get to the last goal of 9,000 by the All-Star break. So please hit that subscribe button. If you want to follow me on social, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Locked On Sports Today has our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You can follow Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.